But now we're moving into critique, which is criteria for validation. You may recall, from those of you who had the opportunity to go to the academy or other trainings, that there's some rules you can apply to generate, or differentiate, I should say, between the best and the not so good ideas that came out of a brainstorming exercise. Right? Because you gave permission to come up with silliness, because you gave people permission to come up with nonsense, in an effort to get the most possible, now you give them permission to go back and look critically at those ideas and winnow them down. Right? If the ideas had to be good to make the list to begin with, people are very loath to critique them. Right? You start to get a static process. But if the rules were very clear up front, we should have some nonsense on this paper if we're any good at this, as much as some good stuff. People then now will critique all the ideas in a more objective way. So you get the benefit not only of more ideas, but get the benefit of more objectivity when it comes back to reviewing the ideas of which ones to keep. Things we got to do. Number one, how do we know a good idea from a bad one on the paper? Do we have any local data that supports that it's true? Is this just your wild hair assumption? Or is this something that seems to be showing up? Now, there can be a lot of things that qualify as data. Right? My favorite examples, we were working in South Chicago many years ago, and it was pizza delivery zones. It was our indicator for crime. If you wouldn't risk a hot pie and $20 in my neighborhood, things weren't better enough to be worth a darn. When they will expand their pizza delivery zone to include my neighborhood, we've gotten somewhere. Darn your other indicators, that's the indicator that shows me things are really better. Now, your evaluator probably would not love pizza delivery zones. They're going to argue validity and all kinds of things with it. But there are a lot of legitimate, creative sources of information that describe conditions in a way that people appreciate as being good enough. Right? So when I say there has to be local data, I'm not saying that you have to have valid and reliable data with a proper sample for all things. Right? That's a standard for many types of data, but not for all. You may just simply have, this has come up in 7 out of 8 of our focus groups. This is a recurring theme from a lot of different voices. There's something here. Right? Okay, so lots of data. Things can be data, but it has to have some data to support it. A second rule. Do we have any prevention science or research to support this idea? Now, I don't have to change the language of what the person in the community generated as the idea into some scientific name. But I just need to make sure that there's science or prevention research behind the idea. And there often is. Right? I've often joked, your grandma would say, idle hands are the devil's tool, especially when they're hanging out with the devil. Right? And Rico and David, Hawkinson Catalano and CTC would say, what? For those same two ideas. Friends who engage in the problem behavior. Right? I think that's a phrase used in one of the survey instruments, right? One of the risk factors, right? Lack of alternative constructive activities. They'd have all these very clean-sounding terms for the same idea. So I don't change the language in my community picture, but I can certainly see that there's science behind it and make sure that there is. Third criteria. There is local experience and wisdom that matters. We have not researched everything that needs to be done. There's not a perfect piece of data for every possible avenue that needs to be understood. So, local experience and wisdom do matter and should be part of the criteria. And last, there is current professional practice. This is the difference between research and practice. And this has to do with the fact that research usually follows by a number of years behind needed action. Think back to the meth epidemic. I noticed that meth is just simply not a topic in the room today, while some years ago it would have been the topic, especially in Kansas or Missouri, right? Iowa, some of the states that are here, right? When that epidemic literally exploded across the country, there was a whole lot of action we needed to take for which we did not have any research. But we still needed to take evidence-based action, right? We needed to be thoughtful in what we did. For example, we knew that a lot of our retailers were selling precursors, the ingredients needed to make meth, were being stolen, right? We needed to figure out how to get retailers to change their behavior. We needed to figure out how to get farmers to change their behavior, right? Nothing on CSAP's list of evidence-based programs had anything to do with farmers and retailers, so we had to devise solutions, right? But it couldn't just be anything goes. And so we went out and said, who has some evidence, some information about this class of action that we need that we can build on? Well, it turns out there's a lot of people who've worked with farmers for years. They're called agricultural extension, and they're brilliant, right? And they're all across the country, and they had amazing tools for us. And this goes back to come close to your home, right? This goes back to Safe Streets, and when Christy Kane was just getting started in Topeka, the Meth Watch program that became the statewide Meth Watch program that became the national Meth Watch program. And we were able to learn from our cooperative extension some key ways that we could work with farmers together to get them to do things differently with anhydrous ammonia tanks. It was evidence-based, but it wasn't a research-based practice, if you will, up here on prevention science. It had not gotten to that level. So we're always looking for evidence. Who knows how? Where's the evidence it would work? But it may come from completely different fields, especially in coalition work when you're working across so many fields. If you're working in law enforcement and education, if you're working in healthcare and media, there's a lot of practice and evidence behind that practice you can draw upon and build upon. Evidence is still a rule, but it may not be in the peer-reviewed literature. It may not be on the list of, right? But it's still evidence-based in my opinion. All right, so these are at least 4 rules you can follow when you're looking at what's on your wall going, well, I got any data for this idea? We have any prevention science? Is this a recurring community wisdom? Has this happened before and we know that if we do this, it can happen again? Is there a field of practice we can draw upon to make sure that we're making the best decision possible? And this can help us winnow a lot of these ideas. The key is to set the criteria objectively before you try to apply the criteria, right? The key is to make sure everybody goes, okay, everyone's idea, no matter who generated it, is subjected to the same decision rule. Our joke yesterday was, you must be this tall to ride this ride. We're in Orlando, Florida, right? So certain rides you get on when you're that tall. So every idea must meet this tall and it gets accepted. And so when you have people who are just adamant about the thing on the list, that's it. I'm telling you, that's it. Like, okay, find me some data. Show me from another field. Talk to other people in the community and find me consensus that it wasn't in our group, but maybe there is wisdom in the community that this is true. I'm not telling you it's not a good idea. I'm telling you it has to have certain characteristics for us to keep it, and we'd love to show us that it does. It can be a really positive way to redirect that person who just wants to blow up your action plan and your logic model, right? By setting some fair rules. Another thing that it does is it helps people without power who generated ideas to have ideas make the mix. And we talked earlier about the rules of the game and that we've got people who with a lot of different bubbles behind their heads around the table and different levels of power dynamics. If that's the case, how do ideas generated by those who don't normally have voice get accepted and understood to be of equal value to those who may have access to power and resources that normally get listened to? If you've got decision rules to begin with, that can be an important power equalizer. Because there's going to be just as much nonsense generated by my C-suite, the CEO, the CFOs, whoever came in from whatever company to join during this process, right? As much nonsense as I'm going to get from my neighborhood. There's equal amounts of wisdom and nonsense in both, and establishing the same rules for both, make sure you keep the best. And when people recognize that there's fair rules to the road. There's a fair and equitable process for what we're going to keep that I can trust. And so, yeah, my idea didn't make it. That probably wasn't the best thing anyway. Okay, that idea didn't make it either, and that one did. And there's a sense of equity about how we're going about it. So you have to have brainstorming rules to be effective, and then you have to establish criteria for what to keep. I just alluded to the process then. Agree to rules. Agree to rules before you start vetting ideas. Don't develop them as you go. That feels very unfair and very arbitrary to people. So if you've got this idea wall, one of those sticky walls so that you can put up, right, that turns the wall into a mixed paper stick, and you've got all these ideas up there, now we say, okay, we're going to try and keep some things here. This is often the next meeting. This is often, right, the next step in the process. Here are the rules. Do we all agree? I just suggested 4 you could start with. You might have friendlier language than I gave you. And I'm sure you'd have some additional ones the group may come up with. Right? But establish the rules of the process before you go through the process so that it can be fair for people to participate and they know how to participate. Begin with the most general. So as I look at these 4 pieces of paper per table, per idea, and there's tons on the wall, where do you start? Right? And one of the things you do is you start with the most general and proceed to the most specific. So if the general notion of why didn't hold up, the more particulars of why may be less important to vet. Right? So it's a way to save time. Start with the general and you work your way to specific with your data. That's also true because you're going to have more data for the general and less data for the specific. That's just true in every community, right? It's easier to have a general number that says availability is high. It's very hard to have the numbers behind it. It requires partnership and generation of data. It's often community specific and unique where you get it. And so if you start with a general, you can start knowing where to attend to get data. This goes back to our conversation earlier where we're frustrated by the fact that we've got tons of data, a lot of it not on the topic that we do need, most of it not organized around the things we're most concerned about. And so despite being data rich, we're knowledge poor. And so if I want to start constructively and carefully asking for more data in the right places, if I start with the general and move to the specific, I can narrow where I'm going to go ask. Do you see what I'm saying? It's just practical that way. And then you can move. And lastly, I want to give this caveat. People often want to use as one of the rules for keeping or not keeping ideas their ability to act on them. Right? We can't have this big old map of everything. We can't do all that. And so they'll start dropping key ideas, not about what to do, but about why things are the way they are from the map, because they'll be concerned they have to own that outcome and be responsible for it. And this is a real danger. You want, at this point, to have a complete and accurate map, even if you can't act on all parts of it. Think comprehensively, even if you can't act comprehensively. Because later on, this afternoon we'll talk about this too, this is where you get to say, well, this is our work. There may be multiple causes, but this is our work. This is someone else's work. Are they doing it? Have we linked with them? This is work we hope to grow into. If we had more resources and more people, this is what we would grow into. This is where we should be recruiting for action, right? And this is something the community, I don't care how many people I had, is not ready to tackle. If I do this right now, this whole thing's going to blow up. So I got to start with this first and then move to this, right? You can start making these choices and eventually become comprehensive. But you can't make that strategic choice if people use as one of the rules for what to toss out things like, well, we just can't get around to that. There's only so many of us. We don't have that kind of money. That's too controversial, right? These become decision rules at the wrong time. Those are not the decision rules for an understanding of the issue. Those are decision rules about what we're going to do. But they carry that in here, and it's a legitimate reason why they do. They're concerned. Your sheriff's sitting at the table going, are you kidding me? Are we signing up for all this? That is not what, nope, you're not signing up for anything yet. We're getting clarity of understanding right now. Okay, so this is a couple of steps in the process I think that are important to avert disaster. Decide on the rules. I suggested 4. You probably need more. Start with the general so you don't waste time, but are focused and know where to generate data, where it's missing. And lastly, remember that you want the complete map now of why. Don't start trimming the whys in anticipation of what you may have in terms of resources for action. Any questions about that before we get into an application exercise? Yes?
Things that you can't, for example, where we live, we're on the T of 2 major highways.
Mm-hmm.
That the things that you can't actually do anything about, would you keep on the list or just recognize them? We're not going to be moving these highways.
Yes, exactly.
Thoroughfare for
yes.
activities.
Yeah.
So what do you do with those type of things that you can't actually impact?
And this is important because these are, yeah, and these aren't minor issues because this is a key feature of the context that explains why we have certain drug trafficking behaviors or certain access points, right? Because we're on that, right? Or I get one where people say we're a highly rural community and that has certain features that matter. What, are we supposed to invite everybody to move here? Yeah, right? No. Okay, so there will be a class of items brainstormed that are unchangeable conditions for which we must protect. So I leave them in the map of whys so that I have interventions that protect me from certain features or that I take advantage of them, even though I can't change the feature itself. So it's going to ask for a different class of action. I'm not actually going to try and get rid of the freeways, right? Quite the opposite, I'm going to say if this is an economic engine for us, as a downside it comes as a nexus point for access. So how do we manage that? What interventions do we need to downside the harm and upside the benefit of having this as a feature of our community? Right? And so I leave it in my map so people can appreciate that it is our action specific to us, not action generically. They see themselves. They see, and I'm sorry, the name of the town that you live in is?
I live in Wausau.
You live in Wausau, yeah. Yes.
Wisconsin.
Just there a couple weeks ago. Yep. So I was in Wausau, and it was fun. It was beautiful. You got to. To my surprise, this is going to sound terrible. You got to go. It's a great place. Well, I mean, there are a lot of towns that are nice in their own right, but there's like it's really pretty cool.
I would like to say let's just move Minneapolis or Green Bay, which is on the opposite ends, or just get us off the Chicago
Yes. Yeah, the Chicago-Milwaukee pipeline is not a fun place to be. So if you've looked at your data, you appreciate that that really isn't just incidental, that these freeways are here, right? It's also partly why the town is there and why those freeways came to be there, that kind of thing. And so you have to have them in your map, or people will say it's not us. It's Anytown, USA. It's not Wausau specifically. It needs to look like Wausau, even if there are things about Wausau you wouldn't change but need to protect from to not get the negative consequence. Good question. Yes?
Would it be advantageous to also leave that kind of stuff on there because maybe the group that you have has, by this point, their creativity is like,
Yeah.
dying.
Yes.
But they may not think of something that somebody later, if you have a good map and a good visual, and you can hand it, you can put it on your wall. All of mine are in my office. They're all
Yes.
on my wall.
Yeah.
And somebody else walks in and like, have you thought of this?
Yes.
And I would leave it there just in case somebody randomly stops by and says, well, did you put this here?
Yes.
Oh, no. I didn't.
This is key. This is brilliant, by the way. This is a very artful use of this, and I would commend it to you even on steroids compared to what you just suggested. Something in the process here suggests, one of the things I always say in trainings is...
It doesn't make for a neat office, I'll tell you.
No, it does not make for a neat office. It does not. It's just a good date. Don't marry it.
Yeah.
I say that often about planning products. Any planning product, your logic model, your action plan, your whatever it is. People like marry these things. You can't change it, right? Duh. Do you know how much it took us to get that? Do you know how many fights we had over that? We'd like to go 6 more months without any more knockdown drag-ups. Don't be messing with my planning products, right? When instead, these things are living documents that should organically be changing. So for example, take a good picture that we hope to create before lunch here that results from one of your analyses, and it's on the wall. It's your current best understanding. That's all it is. As new members come in, what do they know that you don't know? What should be on the map that's not there? Do you have a place to capture that and put that in? Do you have a process to go to the coalition and go, hey, we've learned some things. We're not necessarily going to do anything about it tomorrow, but it needs to be in our map because we're going to have to get around to this, right? As much as in your action plan. So you've just joined our coalition. You've helped us understand something we didn't know. Where do your interests line up here? Where do you fit in this picture? Of this whole map, are you passionate about the whole thing? I don't think so. What part of this is your work? What part of this is your connection point with us? What do you really care about in this picture? Okay, now here's our action over here. What can you do to help work on that part? This can be a wonderful, large touchstone, literally on the wall. It can be a key part of that welcoming process you're talking about for new board members. Here's what we know. We don't think it's perfect. And we're going to have to get rid of some things we used to know because it's changed. But if you can't make it transparent, if you can't bring that to the surface, if you can't give people something to interact, you can't capture what they know in any meaningful way and have the group act on it or accept it or have it follow the same rules so that anybody can come in and add ideas over time. So not only is this an individual actual activity constrained, brainstorm, use the right technique, produce a visual, use it. It's a living document that people can continue to follow the same rules with. Those criteria apply to any new idea that somebody comes in with. Oh, well, new member X always has a fresh idea. Okay, here's the rules we always follow as we enlarge this picture. Let's see if that's true. The whole group gets to see it and agree, and it gets added. So I think it's brilliant to keep it on the wall that way. Very helpful. And the bigger, the better. A few posties here and there. We're thinking about. Maybe over here, we're not sure. Someone said this, but I don't know. Right? Living document.